It was my first year of law school in Los Angeles. I had just moved to the city, and to say I was excited would be an understatement. I had never lived in a place this big, this alive. Los Angeles, with its over 4 million people, felt both thrilling and overwhelming. As a kid, I'd always known I had a half-sister who lived here, though the details were scarce. My parents spoke about her in hushed tones, as though just mentioning her name was enough to stir up something dark. Their anger toward her was palpable, a shadow that hung over our family, and it made her feel like a taboo subject, something forbidden, almost like a secret I was never meant to uncover. Still, I couldn't shake the curiosity. As I got older, I searched for her on social media. I knew what she looked like, at least from the few old photos I had found. But that was the extent of it. We had never met, never spoken, and somehow, despite her being a part of my life, I felt like a stranger to her. She wasn't very active online, which made me feel even more distant from her. The few posts she made were cryptic, fleeting, nothing that gave me any real sense of who she was or what her life was like. Then, one day, about halfway through my first semester, something unexpected happened. I was sitting in my tiny apartment, buried in textbooks, when a notification popped up on my phone. It was a friend request on Facebook. At first, I thought it was spam, but when I looked closer, I saw it was from my sister. Her profile seemed real, her name, her face, her Facebook friends all checked out. There was no reason to doubt it. I hesitated for only a moment before accepting the request. Not long after, another message appeared. "Hey, it's me. I'd love to meet you in person. I'm throwing a little dinner party at a park near you this weekend. It'll be great to finally see you after all these years." The message was friendly, even warm. But the closer I looked, the more I felt an unsettling tug in my stomach. This was it. The moment I had been both dreading and waiting for. We would meet for the first time, face to face. I had so many questions, so many feelings I couldn't yet process. But I was also thrilled. It felt like a door was finally opening, a chance to bridge the gap that had existed between us for so long. But then, the nerves set in. I was still new to LA, and I had no idea which parts of the city were safe at night. What if I got lost? What if something went wrong? Would we click? Or would it be one of those awkward, forced interactions, like in a dramatic movie scene where two strangers try and fail to connect? I kept replaying the possibilities in my mind. What if we met, and she turned out to be nothing like I expected? What if the years of silence had changed us beyond recognition? And what if this meeting wasn't just a simple dinner party, but something far more complicated, something I couldn't even begin to anticipate? As the day approached, my excitement was tangled with anxiety. I tried to calm myself by focusing on the positives: the chance to reconnect with family, the thrill of finally meeting her. But deep down, there was a nagging fear. What if I tried to talk to her, and she just shut me out? What if she had her own secrets, her own story to tell, and what if that story was darker than I was prepared for? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into something far more mysterious than I could understand. And as I walked toward the park that night, The air felt heavy, like it was thick with secrets waiting to be uncovered. Would this meeting be the beginning of something beautiful or the start of a new chapter in a much darker story? Before I dive into what happened, let me just apologize for my storytelling. I've never been the best at writing, but I'll do my best to capture what happened. Last night, my friends and I decided to go to the movies. We were really excited to see Joker 2, and we'd been talking about it for weeks. The plan was simple: show up, grab some snacks, and enjoy a good night out. But, as it often happens when things feel too easy, fate had something else in store for us. We hadn't bought our tickets online because, honestly, we figured there would be no problem. We weren't expecting it to be sold out, and the theater was close by, so why bother with the online purchase? Big mistake. When we got there, just a few minutes before showtime, the doors were already closed, and the last few people were trickling out of the theater. The movie had already started, and we had missed our chance. I won't lie, we were all pretty disappointed. It wasn't just about the movie, it was about the night we had planned, the excitement that had been building up all week, only to be dashed by a closed door. But here's where things took a strange turn. We were standing outside the theater, trying to decide what to do next, when one of my friends, let's call him Jack, suggested that we check out the back of the building. He had heard rumors that there was another small, hidden theater in the back of the cinema complex, one that wasn't always open to the public. It wasn't on the main theater map, and honestly, we had never noticed it before. Jack was always the adventurous one, the kind of guy who believed in odd, offbeat stories and mysteries, so we decided to humor him. We walked around the side of the building, past the dumpsters and the back entrance, where the only light came from the faint glow of a few flickering bulbs. It felt strangely quiet back there. Too quiet. I mean, it was late, around 10:30 p.m. by then, but even so, there should have been more noise, right? Cars in the parking lot, the sound of people laughing or talking. But it was just still. Almost too still. Jack led us to a side door that appeared to be slightly ajar. It didn't look like a typical entrance to a theater, more like a staff-only door. At first, none of us were sure if we should go in. I mean, it could have been some maintenance area or just a storage room. But Jack, ever the risk-taker, pushed it open with a slight creak and walked in without hesitation. One by one, we followed him, though I'll admit, I wasn't exactly thrilled about it. Inside, the air smelled old stale popcorn, musty carpet, and a faint odor of mildew. It was dimly lit, the overhead lights buzzing faintly. The walls were lined with old movie posters, some of them so faded I couldn't make out the titles. It didn't feel like a typical theater. It felt forgotten. Like something that had been sealed off long ago, only to be rediscovered by mistake. We continued down the narrow hallway, our footsteps echoing eerily in the empty space. We rounded a corner and found a small, unmarked door. This one was slightly cracked open too. Jack pushed it in, revealing what looked like a private screening room, small, dusty, with only a handful of seats. But what caught my attention wasn't the room itself. It was the screen. The projector was running, but the image on the screen wasn't from Joker 2. No, what we saw was much more disturbing. It was a grainy video of what looked like a security camera footage of the very same hallway we had just walked through. The exact hallway, the one with the flickering lights. But in the footage, the hallway wasn't empty. There was a figure moving slowly down the corridor, a shadowy figure wearing a black hoodie. We couldn't see their face, but something about their movements sent a chill up my spine. The figure was walking slowly, deliberately, almost as though they were waiting for us to find this place. Before I could react, the lights in the room flickered, and the projector hummed louder. The screen went black for a second, then came back on, but this time the footage had changed. Now, the camera was showing a view of the back of the building, the same door we had just come through. And standing there, in the doorway, was the same figure, watching us. I turned to my friends, my heart racing. They had seen it too. Jack, usually the bold one, looked pale, his usual grin wiped off his face. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice shaking. But before we could move, the door slammed shut behind us, locking us in. Panic set in. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to escape, but every instinct told me we were in danger. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, and the flickering lights grew dimmer, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. We tried everything to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like something or someone was watching us. The room was silent except for the faint whir of the projector. And then, we heard it. A soft knock on the wall, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps. They were coming closer. We were not alone. I can't fully explain what happened next. It's a blur of panic and chaos. We managed to break the lock and escape, running through the dark corridors until we found an exit. The entire time, I could feel something behind me, something chasing us, but when we finally burst out into the cold night air, we didn't look back. We never spoke about it again after that night, but I can't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That whoever or whatever was in that building knew exactly who we were. And as I sit here, telling you this, I can't help but wonder if the figure we saw in the footage is still out there, waiting. So, if you're ever in the area, and you happen to find yourself near that old movie theater, you might want to think twice before wandering to the back. Some doors are better left unopened. It was the summer of my 16th year, a time when the world felt both boundless and confining. I lived in a small, unassuming town where everyone knew each other, and secrets were hard to keep. But beneath the surface of our quiet neighborhood lay shadows I rarely acknowledged, shadows that whispered of dangers I couldn't quite grasp. I was just another teenager, but with a secret obsession that consumed me: marijuana. My life was simple, almost monotonous, yet my fixation with pot provided an escape from the mundane realities of daily life. Every day, without fail, I embarked on the same routine. I'd walk the familiar routes to the local convenience store, my mind clouded with thoughts of the next high. The path wasn't the most direct, but I preferred it that way. I'd cut through an old, abandoned apartment complex nearby, a relic of better days, now standing silent and desolate, its windows shattered and walls crumbling. There was an unsettling stillness there, a sense that something was always watching, but I brushed it off. I was just a kid, lost in her own world, oblivious to the lurking dangers. On one particularly sweltering afternoon, as the sun beat down relentlessly, I made my way through the decaying halls of the abandoned building. The air was thick with dust, and every step echoed ominously. Suddenly, out of the shadows, a man emerged. He was impeccably dressed in a crisp, dark suit, a stark contrast to the dilapidated surroundings. His presence was jarring, almost surreal, as if he didn't belong in this forsaken place. His eyes were sharp and calculating, giving me an immediate sense of unease. "Hey, how are you doing?" he asked, his voice smooth and unnervingly polite. A chill ran down my spine, but I forced myself to keep walking, ignoring his question. Men in suits were a rarity here, especially in such an eerie setting. His sudden appearance felt out of place, unsettling me more than I cared to admit. I couldn't help but glance back, feeling his eyes follow my every move, but I pushed the feeling aside, convincing myself it was just my imagination. With my blunt wraps in hand, I headed back toward the store. The scent of smoke still clung to my clothes, a reminder of my daily ritual. As I approached the corner near the abandoned building, something caught my eye: a white truck parked at the far end of the lot. My heart skipped a beat. The same man from before stood by the truck, his presence sending a shiver of dread through me. The streets were bustling with people, but an inexplicable sense of danger hovered in the air. Deciding to take the longer, busier route to feel safer, I walked along the crowded street, hoping the uneasy feeling would dissipate. But as I walked, the sound of an engine growing louder behind me made my blood run cold. The white truck had followed me, inching closer with each passing moment. My pace quickened, but it was no use. Suddenly, the man sprang from the truck, his movements swift and predatory. Before I could even process what was happening, he was upon me, his grip like iron. Panic surged through me. I weighed barely 100 pounds, no match for his strength. I tried to scream, my voice caught in my throat, and I swung my elbow wildly, but he remained unyielding. Just when all hope seemed lost, a commotion erupted nearby. A woman, visibly intoxicated and known to wander the streets, came running toward us, her voice frantic. "Put her down," she yelled, desperation etched into every word. Startled by her intervention, the man released me, shoving me back to the ground before he sped away, the truck roaring down the street. Lying there, heart pounding and breaths ragged, I struggled to comprehend what had just happened. Who was that man? Why did he target me? Questions swirled in my mind, but answers were elusive. Nearly a decade has passed since that harrowing summer day. The memory remains vivid, a constant reminder of that terrifying encounter. I make it a point to stop and offer food to the woman who saved me, ensuring she has what she needs to get by. Over time, I even paid her to seek rehabilitation, and now she seems to be doing well, reunited with her grandchildren and holding down a job. Her intervention wasn't just a random act of kindness, it was the turning point that changed both our lives. Despite her transformation, the experience left an indelible mark on me. I never walk alone again, always wary of the shadows that might conceal unexpected threats. The quiet streets that once felt safe now hold a lingering tension, a reminder that danger can lurk where you least expect it. The fear of that day has taught me to stay vigilant, to value the unexpected heroes who emerge in moments of crisis, and to never take the seemingly ordinary for granted. That summer, when I was 16, I learned that sometimes the most frightening experiences can lead to the most profound personal growth. And though the memory of that stranger still haunts me, it also reminds me of the resilience we find within ourselves when faced with unimaginable fear. Before we dive into the chilling events that unfolded, let me set the scene with a bit of background. I'm deeply passionate about LARPing live-action role-playing where weekends are transformed into epic adventures in the heart of the woods, dressed as medieval fantasy characters. These events are a sanctuary for me, attended with my friend and partner, where we forge strong bonds and meet a diverse array of people. Nearly everyone I encounter is genuinely kind, embodying the spirit of camaraderie, until one day, everything changed with the arrival of Greg. Standing around 5 feet 10 inches with an unkempt neckbeard and an imposing presence, Greg immediately gave off an unsettling vibe that made me uneasy. As I was meticulously setting up my tent, Greg swung by, greeting me with an overly enthusiastic hi, but his demeanor was anything but friendly. He struck up a conversation about Ark Survival, a game I had devoted over 3,000 hours to, but instead of sharing genuine insights, he spewed blatant misinformation, misnaming dinosaurs, and describing impossible feats within the game, even with mods. Each time I corrected him, his irritation grew, turning our brief interaction into a tense and uncomfortable exchange. Despite my efforts to distance myself, Greg's presence lingered throughout the event. Fast forward to around 10 to 11 p.m., the event had officially started, enforcing strict decorum rules that banned any mention of the real world: no cars, no TV, no pop culture references. During a campfire game with my friends, Greg reappeared, attempting to disrupt our fantasy by repeatedly referencing video games and the outside world. Frustrated, my friends and I politely asked him to either leave or make an effort to stay in character, and he begrudgingly complied, but his departure left a lingering sense of dread. The next day, while gathering resources on a secluded trail for our LARPing activities, Greg confronted me again, asking if I'd like to grab coffee sometime. Firmly declining, I tried to walk away, but he grabbed my arm, insisting that I come with him alone in the woods to look for plants, a scenario that should have been perfect for collaboration but instead spiraled into pure fear. Panicking, I sprinted towards the village, heart pounding, only to be met by concerned neighbors who quickly recognized the threat. Armed with foam weapons, they bravely confronted Greg, forcing him to back off temporarily and carving him a new foam weapon as a deterrent. Relieved, I spent a few minutes with them before rejoining my friends, hoping the nightmare was over. However, as night fell and around midnight, needing a break, I decided to use the bathroom. Returning in the darkness, Greg emerged from a bush, pinning me against a tree with a look of wild disappointment. "Why don't you hold my hand or hug me like you do with others?" he demanded, his voice trembling with frustration. I tried to explain that my affections were reserved for my fiancé and friends, but Greg's desperation only intensified. "I just want a little kiss, and then you can go," he pleaded. Refusing his advances, I pushed him away, and my screams alerted my friends and neighbors. About 10 people rushed over to help, armed with their foam weapons once more. Greg attempted to justify his actions, claiming he was interrogating me for information about the demons in our LARPing scenario, but my friends, having witnessed his erratic behavior before, were unamused and insisted he leave. The neighbors reinforced our stance, threatening him with the wrath of death's altar, a phrase that sent shivers down my spine and effectively drove him away. My fiancée, deeply concerned, took me aside to ensure I was okay as the event's owner arrived to handle the situation. Greg was expelled from future events, a relief mixed with lingering fear. Reflecting on these terrifying encounters, the thin line between safety and lurking danger became painfully clear. These experiences taught me the invaluable lesson of trusting my instincts and the importance of vigilance, even in environments. Horrifying ordeals, reminding me always to stay aware and heed the warnings that my gut feelings provide. Always trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember that the most terrifying things often hide behind the guise of a friendly facade. Back in 2013, I had relocated to Providence, Rhode Island, driven by the promise of a new job and the hope of a fresh start. Settling into a spacious townhouse with my 4-year-old daughter, we were newcomers in a city where neighborhoods could change drastically from one street to the next. Our street was adorned with beautiful floral trees, creating an inviting facade, yet Providence had its own peculiarities that kept me on edge. Despite being relatively new and not knowing many people, we quickly became acquainted with Ben, a kind older gentleman living next door in the connected townhouse. Ben exuded a warmth that made our small community feel safer, even though a few nearby streets bordered rougher neighborhoods. I never considered myself overly concerned about safety, rarely taking the precautionary measures I saw recommended on Facebook. However, a few nights before the incident, a safety tip caught my attention: place your car keys next to your bed so you could quickly press the alarm and scare off any intruders. Uncharacteristically, I decided to heed this advice, setting my keys within easy reach beside my bed. One evening, after tucking my daughter into bed and reading a book in our second-floor bedroom with the light on, I heard a loud noise outside. Curiosity and a hint of anxiety led me to peer out the window, but I saw nothing unusual. Taking some melatonin to help me sleep, I turned off the light and tried to drift into rest. About half an hour later, what felt like an earthquake jolted me awake. The room shook violently, and a deafening thud reverberated through the house. Heart racing, I gasped, and sprang out of bed, torn between the fear that it was my imagination and the unsettling sensation that something was terribly wrong. In a panic, I rushed to my daughter's room, fearing she might have fallen or injured herself, only to find her sleeping soundly, oblivious to the chaos I felt. Confused and now more alarmed, another loud bang echoed through the house, intensifying the eerie feeling that something was amiss. Grabbing my car key fob, I nervously descended to the first floor, determined to investigate. As I cautiously inspected each room, the house remained eerily silent, the initial fear subsiding but replaced by an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. I returned to bed, struggling to fall asleep again, the night's events replaying in my mind, but eventually, exhaustion took over, and I shut my eyes, hoping for peace. The next day began like any other, until I noticed that a friend had repeatedly called me in the afternoon. After picking up my daughter from preschool, I returned his call, only to hear him say, "Did you hear?" Puzzled, I asked what he meant. His voice trembled as he explained that news outlets were swarming our street about an hour ago, with news trucks even parked in our driveway. My confusion deepened as he continued, "3 men broke into your neighbor's place last night, tied him up at gunpoint, stole thousands of dollars worth of items, and took off with his car." I immediately fell to my knees, overwhelmed with fear and guilt. The realization hit me hard. I had heard the sounds of the intruders breaking into Ben's house the night before. I had almost pressed the alarm but hesitated, paralyzed by uncertainty. Tears streamed down my face as I grappled with the terrifying thought that I had been so close to danger without even knowing it. Feeling completely unsafe, I urgently called a friend to come over and stay with us for the night, seeking comfort and protection. It wasn't until the next day that I finally got the chance to speak to Ben. He recounted the horrifying ordeal, explaining that the intruders had smashed the basement window and entered silently. The sounds I heard the night before were them knocking him down and restraining him to prevent any noise from alerting anyone. They had scoped out his place beforehand, noticing my light through the window and waiting until mine was off to make their move, unaware that it was my home. Ben had been held captive for over 12 hours before breaking free and calling the police. As I listened, I broke down and apologized profusely, sharing what I had heard and the immense fear it had caused me. Ben, despite his ordeal, expressed profound relief that the same fate hadn't befall my daughter and me, alleviating some of my overwhelming guilt. The men responsible were never caught, leaving a lingering sense of unease in our community. In the aftermath, I felt compelled to take measures for protection, ordering a taser, which was illegal, and some mace, even contemplating getting a gun, though I ultimately decided against it. Thankfully, nothing of that magnitude has happened since, but the memory of that night remains vivid, a constant reminder of how fragile our sense of safety truly is. Reflecting on this terrifying experience, I learned the invaluable lesson of trusting my instincts and the importance of vigilance, even in environments meant for escape and camaraderie. The shadows in our homes and neighborhoods hold secrets and dangers that can transform ordinary lives into horrifying ordeals, reminding me always to stay aware and heed the warnings that my gut feelings provide. Always trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember that the most terrifying things often hide behind the guise of normalcy. This happened fairly recently, a night I had been looking forward to spending with friends in the city for some much-needed relaxation and drinks. I arrived at the train station only to discover that the trains to the city center weren't running that day for some inexplicable reason, leaving us with a replacement bus service instead. Determined not to let this setback ruin our plans, I began searching the sprawling station for the hidden buses, navigating through crowded corridors and dimly lit hallways. After what felt like an eternity, I finally stumbled upon a promising corridor that seemed to lead to the replacement buses. Just as hope began to surge, I heard the unmistakable sound of running footsteps echoing behind me. Turning around, my heart skipped a beat as I saw an Arabic man sprinting to a stop beside me. His appearance was striking tall, with a thick neck beard and an intense gaze that sent chills down my spine. He quickly struck up a conversation, offering to teach me Arabic, which felt oddly invasive given the circumstances. Later, he inquired about the replacement bus service, and I responded that it was probably as lost as he was, explaining that I was trying to find it on my own. Assuming that we were both on the same quest, he continued walking beside me, suggesting that teaming up might increase our chances of finding the bus together. In hindsight, I deeply regret not taking a different path, like darting into the nearest bathroom to escape his unnerving presence. As luck would have it, the corridor did indeed lead to the replacement bus, and the driver stood outside the doors, assuring us that we had plenty of time and that we were the first passengers. The bus was eerily empty, amplifying the tension in the air. I chose a random seat near the window, eager to put on my headphones and drown out any lingering unease. However, to my dismay, the man insisted on sitting right next to me, effectively trapping me in the middle row of seats. At first, I dismissed it as a minor inconvenience, thinking he might just want company in the otherwise deserted bus. But as the bus began to move, he started bombarding me with intrusive questions, which I tried to ignore, offering only one-word answers. Frustrated, I put my headphones on tightly, attempting to focus on finding a good song to listen to and shut him out of my personal space. Despite my efforts, his persistence only grew. He began complimenting my appearance, telling me he thought I was beautiful, and repeatedly expressed how much he liked me. My discomfort escalated as he leaned in closer, making unsettling kissy sounds with his lips, inching his face toward mine. Panic set in, and I felt myself shrinking away from his unwanted advances, my heart racing in my chest. Just as I was about to lose all hope, a man around my age sitting a few seats back became my unexpected hero. He noticed my distress and intervened swiftly, firmly telling the creepy man to F off and to stop bothering me. Through gritted teeth, he demanded that the man move away, emphasizing that he was clearly intruding and needed to mind his own business. The driver, seemingly unaware of the unfolding drama, looked confused, but my hero didn't hesitate. He confronted the man, asking if he wanted to fight, to which the creepy individual reluctantly agreed to leave when the driver called out about potential problems needing attention. Relieved beyond measure, I mouthed several thank yous to my hero, who simply smiled as if it was no big deal. The creepy man attempted to follow me off the bus, but my friends met me at the exit, and together we ensured he walked away, leaving me shaken but safe. The entire ordeal left me with a lingering sense of vulnerability, highlighting the thin line between safety and danger in unexpected places. It reinforced the importance of trusting my instincts and the profound impact a brave stranger can have in moments of fear. From that night on, I remained ever vigilant, knowing that sometimes the most terrifying threats can arise when least expected, and that true heroes can emerge from the most ordinary of settings. It wasn't something I would normally share, and the lingering fear of regret kept me hesitant. Yet, here I am, recounting a night that forever altered my sense of safety and trust. About a year ago, feeling the monotony of boredom and the endless scroll of the internet, I decided to visit Omegle, a platform that once thrived but is now defunct, where strangers connected through video or text chat. At 19, I frequented it, navigating conversations that ranged from the mundane to surprisingly pleasant interactions. Omegle was a place of endless possibilities, where time seemed to slip away unnoticed as I engaged with people from all walks of life. One evening, as the clock ticked past midnight, I stumbled upon someone named Kane. He claimed to be 23, and our chat quickly spiraled into hours of deep discussions about philosophy, life, and our mutual interests. The connection felt genuine, and despite my anxiety, I dismissed the subtle red flags that lingered in the background of our conversations. Kane was articulate, thoughtful, and seemed to understand me in ways I hadn't anticipated. We talked about everything from the meaning of existence to our favorite books and movies. It was intoxicating, the way he made me feel heard and valued. As the night wore on, our conversation never waned. We delved into personal stories, shared dreams, and even our fears. It was a connection I hadn't expected to find on Omegle, a place often associated with fleeting and superficial interactions. By the early hours of the morning, it felt like we had known each other for years. The connection was so strong that Kane suggested we meet in person for a camping trip, something I naively agreed to, thinking it was a natural progression after hours of talking. He lived only a few hours away, and despite my parents' strict warnings about meeting strangers from the internet, I proceeded, hoping to maintain the connection we had built. The excitement of the camping trip overshadowed the uneasy thoughts that occasionally flitted through my mind. The idea of spending time in nature, away from the hustle and bustle of daily life, was appealing. Plus, Kane seemed trustworthy, and I believed that our online rapport would translate into real-life camaraderie. We began planning the trip meticulously, discussing the best trails, the necessary gear, and the locations we wanted to explore. It felt like an adventure waiting to unfold. As the day of the trip approached, the anticipation grew. I double-checked my supplies, ensuring I had everything I needed for the overnight stay. Despite the excitement, there was a nagging sense of unease that I couldn't quite shake off. Maybe it was the late-night conversations or the fact that I was meeting someone I barely knew in person. Regardless, I brushed aside these thoughts, convincing myself that everything would be fine. The morning of the trip, I arrived at Kane's house as agreed. He greeted me warmly, his smile putting me at ease. My parents had been insistent on ensuring my safety, but I had assured them that Kane was a trustworthy individual whom I had known for over a month. His parents met us as well, further easing my apprehensions. The drive to Nimham Mountain in New York was filled with light-hearted banter and shared stories, making the journey feel short and pleasant. Nimham Mountain was a picturesque location, surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. As we approached the designated campsite, the serene beauty of the area was captivating. However, as we began unloading our gear, subtle signs hinted that something was amiss. Kane seemed unusually distant, his demeanor shifting from jovial to reserved without any clear reason. I shrugged it off, attributing it to the stress of travel or perhaps the cold weather. We decided to set up our tents near a small clearing, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. As night fell, the darkness enveloped us, broken only by the glow of our campfire. The crackling flames cast eerie shadows, dancing on the faces of the two of us. Kane suggested we share stories, a common pastime among campers. I agreed, eager to continue building our rapport in the peaceful wilderness. As the night deepened, our conversations took a darker turn. Kane began sharing unsettling tales, speaking of his experiences that bordered on the macabre. He spoke of being a soldier in Russia, a statement that initially seemed like a joke but soon took on a menacing tone. His humor became twisted, and his eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity. I tried to laugh it off, but a shiver ran down my spine, and a sense of dread began to settle in. The hours ticked by, and the once comforting sounds of the forest grew ominous. The howling wind and rustling leaves outside seemed to mirror the turmoil brewing inside me. I attempted to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, but Kane remained fixated on his dark humor. The fire burned low, casting long shadows that seemed to twist and contort into sinister shapes. Suddenly, Kane's demeanor changed abruptly. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It's too cold for us to carry our supplies to the campsite," he said, a statement that seemed out of place given our earlier plans. Confusion flickered in my mind, but before I could respond, he insisted that we stay in the car for the night. The cold outside was biting, and I reluctantly agreed, thinking it was a practical decision to avoid the harsh weather. As we settled into the car, the atmosphere grew tense. Kane's eyes darted nervously towards the darkened forest, and his hands trembled slightly as he fumbled with the car keys. I tried to make small talk, but his responses were curt and distant. The night stretched on, and sleep eluded me as I lay in the back seat, feeling trapped and vulnerable. In the early hours of the morning, the tranquility was shattered by the sound of glass breaking. My heart raced as I turned to see Kane standing by the window, his face contorted with anger and something far more sinister. Before I could react, he lunged at me, his hands gripping my shoulders tightly. Panic surged through me as he forced me to the floor, the reality of the situation crashing down like a tidal wave. The minutes that followed were a blur of fear and helplessness. Kane's intentions were clear, and the room seemed to close in around me. I fought to stay conscious, tears streaming down my face as I prayed for the ordeal to end. My mind raced, desperately searching for a way out, a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. Eventually, Kane released me, his face blank as he dressed himself silently. He returned to the front seat, propped his feet up on the steering wheel, and pretended to sleep. I lay there in the back, my body trembling uncontrollably, trying to process the horror that had just unfolded. The weight of what had happened pressed down on me, and I struggled to gather the strength to move or speak. Hours passed in agonizing silence until the first rays of dawn began to creep through the windows. The wind outside had ceased, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. Kane stirred, and I knew it was time to leave. My heart pounded in my chest as I braced myself for the next phase of the nightmare. As we began the drive back down the mountain, the car was filled with an oppressive silence. I could feel the weight of what had happened pressing down on me, making it difficult to breathe. My mind raced with thoughts of how to escape, how to seek help, but fear held me in its grip. Kane's presence was a constant reminder of my vulnerability, and I felt powerless to change my situation. The journey back was a test of endurance, each mile bringing me closer to safety yet also prolonging the torment. I mustered the courage to speak, asking Kane about his intentions and why he had forced himself upon me. His responses were vague, filled with half-truths and evasions that only deepened my confusion and fear. The miles stretched on, and I felt trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. As we neared my hometown, the familiar sights of the city brought a flicker of hope. However, the sight of flashing lights in the rearview mirror shattered that hope instantly. My heart raced as I realized we were being pulled over by the police. Panic surged through me as I tried to comprehend what was happening. My father was a law enforcement officer, and the thought of him being involved was both terrifying and relieving. The police approached our car, and two officers stepped out, their expressions a mix of concern and disappointment. I quickly rolled down my window, recognizing one of the officers as the daughter of their boss. Their presence added a layer of confusion and fear to the already tense situation. One officer directed Kane to step out of the car, and I felt a surge of anxiety as I tried to explain our presence without revealing the horrifying truth of what had transpired. In a frantic attempt to protect myself and maintain some semblance of control, I avoided divulging the details of the assault. Instead, I focused on expressing my fear and the need to return home safely. My heart sank as I watched Kane struggle to maintain his composure, his lies beginning to unravel under the scrutiny of the officers. The second officer, sensing the tension, questioned Kane about his information, and it was then that the facade began to crumble. Kane's lies were exposed. The name he provided was inconsistent, and discrepancies in his story raised red flags. The officers were quick to see through his deception, informing him that he had missed a stop sign but choosing to let him off with a warning. The realization that Kane's true nature was revealed in such a way left me both relieved and traumatized. The drive home was filled with a mix of emotions: anger, fear, and a deep sense of betrayal. Upon reaching my house, I could barely contain my emotions. I let my feelings spill out, screaming at Kane for his deceit and the pain he had caused me. His attempts to apologize fell on deaf ears as I demanded he leave me alone forever. The ordeal was finally over, but the scars it left were deep and enduring. Once inside, I gathered my belongings and retreated to the sanctuary of my room, where I could finally begin to process the trauma of the night. My parents remained unaware of the true extent of what had happened, and the burden of keeping the secret weighed heavily on me. The silence of the house was deafening as I sat alone, the reality of the assault sinking in. A text message from Kane brought a wave of nausea crashing over me. "I'm sorry about what happened. I really am. It makes you feel any better? I just got pulled over, so that's my karma. I guess let me know if you wanna talk." The simplicity and timing of the message only deepened my distress. I quickly screenshot the message, blocked his number, and deleted his contact, desperate to erase any remnants of that horrifying night from my life. Despite my efforts to move forward, the memories lingered, haunting me almost every day. The experience left me hyper-aware and distrustful of strangers, even those who seemed harmless. Everyday interactions became fraught with anxiety, and the simple act of meeting someone new now carried an undercurrent of fear. The isolation that followed was both a coping mechanism and a barrier, protecting me from potential harm but also from the meaningful connections I once cherished. Therapy became a cornerstone of my healing journey, helping me navigate the complex emotions and fears that emerged in the aftermath of the assault. Each session was a step towards reclaiming my narrative, a way to process the trauma and begin to rebuild my sense of self. The road to recovery was long and fraught with challenges, but with time and support, I began to find strength in my vulnerability. I often found myself reflecting on what drove Kane to such darkness. Was it a troubled past, a warped sense of reality, or something more sinister? The questions remained unanswered, leaving me with a sense of unease that lingered long after the physical wounds had begun to heal. Sharing my story became a part of my healing process, a way to reclaim my voice and perhaps prevent someone else from walking the path I did. The internet, once a place of endless possibilities and connections, had become the setting for my deepest fears. What began as a seemingly innocuous interaction on Omegle transformed into a nightmare that would forever change my perception of safety and trust. The experience taught me the invaluable lesson of listening to my instincts, of trusting that inner voice that senses danger long before the mind fully comprehends it. As days turned into weeks and months, the trauma of that night became a part of me, shaping my interactions and my worldview. The world felt both larger and smaller, a vast expanse where dangers lurked in unexpected places, yet paradoxically, confined within the walls of my own experiences. The hypervigilance that once seemed excessive became a necessary shield against the unknown, a way to protect myself from the shadows that had once consumed me. Despite the lingering fear, I found solace in the connections I still held dear: my boyfriend, who provided unwavering support, and friends who stood by me through the darkest of times. Their presence was a reminder that not all connections were to be feared, that genuine bonds could be formed despite the horrors I had endured. The journey to healing was not linear, marked by moments of vulnerability and strength, but it was a journey that I was determined to navigate with resilience and hope. In the quiet moments of reflection, I revisited the site of my trauma: Nimham Mountain. A quick Google search revealed that the area was often referred to as Kane Mountain, North Trail Loop, New York. The name itself seemed almost poetic, a twisted play on the horrors that unfolded there. The knowledge that Kane had orchestrated this encounter in such a remote and seemingly innocuous location only deepened the sense of betrayal and fear that I felt. If you've made it this far or take anything away from my story, please let it be this: trust your instincts and trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. The intuitive sense of unease that I ignored in the moments leading up to the assault was a warning sign that I failed to heed. My parents' warnings, once dismissed as overprotective, now echoed in my mind as a poignant reminder of the importance of caution. I know that what happened was the result of my own irrational teenage actions. I shouldn't have met up with someone I didn't know, but in that moment, I had faith that he would be a normal person, somewhat at least. I just wish that I would have listened to my instincts and my parents' warnings. The what-ifs are endless, and the thought of not having fabricated that police story to escape his grasp is a haunting contemplation I refuse to entertain. The impact of that night extends beyond the immediate fear and trauma. It has reshaped my approach to life, my interactions, and my perception of the world. The once innocent act of meeting someone online has become a source of anxiety and caution, a constant reminder of the fragility of safety in an increasingly connected world. The experience has instilled in me a profound respect for personal boundaries and the importance of safeguarding one's well-being above all else. As I continue to heal, the memories of that night remain vivid, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Each day is a step towards reclaiming my sense of safety and rebuilding the trust that was shattered. The journey is ongoing, marked by both challenges and triumphs, but the lessons learned are invaluable. I have learned to prioritize my instincts, to listen to that inner voice that whispers caution in the face of uncertainty. Sharing this story is not just a means of catharsis but a call to action for others. The digital age has brought about unprecedented opportunities for connection, yet it has also opened doors to unforeseen dangers. It is a stark reminder that behind every screen lies a human being, with their own intentions and motivations, some benign, others malicious. The onus is on each of us to navigate this landscape with vigilance and discernment, to protect ourselves and those we care about from the shadows that lurk in the digital abyss. In the end, the night on Nimam Mountain was a defining moment in my life, a turning point that reshaped my understanding of safety, trust, and resilience. It taught me that even in the face of unimaginable fear, the human spirit has the capacity to endure and overcome. The scars may remain, but so does the strength to move forward, to embrace life with a newfound appreciation for the delicate balance between vulnerability and protection. If there's one thing to take away from my story, it's this: trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. The instinctual warning that I ignored led me down a path of fear and trauma, a journey I would not wish upon anyone. Let my experience be a beacon of caution, a reminder that while connections can be meaningful and profound, they must be approached with care and awareness. As I continue to navigate the aftermath of that night, I hold on to the lessons learned and the strength gained. The journey to healing is ongoing, but with each passing day, I grow more resilient, more attuned to the subtle signs that guide me away from danger and towards safety. The memory of Cain and the horrors he inflicted will always be a part of me, but so will the unwavering resolve to protect myself and others from similar fates. In sharing my story, I hope to shine a light on the darkness that can lurk behind seemingly innocent interactions. May it serve as a cautionary tale, a reminder to stay vigilant, to prioritize safety over fleeting connections, and to never underestimate the importance of listening to that inner voice that senses danger long before the mind fully comprehends it. Trusting my instincts might not have saved me entirely, but it has become a cornerstone of my resilience, guiding me through the shadows of that traumatic night and into the light of a more cautious, yet hopeful, existence. It happened just a few hours ago, and while I'm no longer trembling with fear, a part of me still seethes with anger that my pizza got stolen in such a bizarre way, and I need to tell you what went down. There's this local rumor that a strange man has been living deep in the woods near our town, but I always shrugged it off as some urban legend, because during my countless night drives I never saw anyone lurking in the darkness. Tonight, though, I decided to go for a late drive as usual, and on my way home I stopped by a familiar pizza place, craving something hot and cheesy before diving into a long session of Minecraft. I paid for my pizza, slid it into one hand, and with my phone in the other, began texting a friend, asking if he wanted to join me online when I got back. I was already picturing myself at home, front door locked, laptop humming, settling in for a night of pixelated adventure. But as I stepped off the curb to cross toward the dimly lit parking area, I glanced up from my phone and saw something odd beneath my car, some kind of shape or shadow huddled low. At first, I thought maybe it was just a stray cat or a dog seeking warmth, so I clicked my key fob to unlock the doors, hoping the sudden beep would scare off anything lingering. Nothing moved. No animal darted away. The shape remained. Feeling a prickle of unease, I put my phone away, turned on its flashlight, and forced myself to take a closer look. That's when I saw him, a dirty, naked guy with big, bloodshot eyes staring right at me from a crouched position beside the driver's side door, his skin streaked with dried mud, looking more feral than human. I do not usually get scared easily, but this man unnerved me deeply. His gaze was wild, as if he had just crawled up from some buried nightmare. Before I could speak, I startled myself by stumbling backward, and in that panicked motion, I dropped my pizza, the steaming slices spilling onto the cold pavement. Furious and frightened, I yelled for him to back off, my voice echoing in the empty lot. The man didn't seem to care about me as much as he cared about the food. He tilted his head, eyed the scattered toppings, then lunged forward like a starving animal. In seconds, he had snatched the pizza and bolted off into the dark, his silhouette vanishing down the road, presumably heading toward those infamous woods. My heart hammered, but I had no intention of chasing after him. Instead, I locked my car and rushed back inside the pizza place, telling the employees what had happened. They looked at me like I was joking or drunk, their disbelieving smirks making me feel even more unsettled. Eventually, when my nerves calmed just enough, I ordered another pizza, determined not to let this night get the best of me. This time I sprinted to my car, jumped in, locked the doors, and drove straight home without looking back. Once inside, I locked every door and window, even my bedroom door, just to feel safe. I can't shake the image of that mud-caked face and those bulging eyes, but I'll try to forget by immersing myself in Minecraft until sunrise, hoping that by morning this whole thing will feel like a surreal nightmare and not a glimpse of something lurking at the edges of my world. This happened about 6 or 7 years ago, and the memory still makes my skin crawl. I was playing soccer for a year at a community college, right after high school. It was a typical college experience: meet new people, deal with random encounters, and juggle the chaos of classes. One person I met during that time was a guy who worked for the athletics department. I didn't know him very well, but we interacted here and there, and soon enough, he became a regular part of my life, though not in the way I expected. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I had a 1-hour gap between classes, and that's when things started to take a strange turn. He'd been noticing me hanging around the library, so one day he walked up to me and asked, "What are you doing here?" I told him I had an hour to kill before my next class. It seemed innocent enough at first, just a casual conversation between two students. But over the next few weeks, this guy began showing up regularly, hanging out with me during my breaks. He wasn't waiting for anything, just hanging out. I didn't mind at first, because he seemed normal enough, just another college student. And let's be honest, I was lonely and thought it was nice to have someone to talk to. But then things started to get a little weird. At first, he would bring me small gifts, like chocolate, or some other sweet treats. I thought it was just him being nice, but then he started doing it more often, and the gestures got a little too much. It wasn't just casual kindness, it felt like he was trying to get my attention, to make me feel like I owed him something. But the strangest part was, he'd always just show up out of nowhere. It didn't seem like a coincidence. If I had a break, he'd find a way to be there, and if I wasn't in the library, I'd get a message from him asking where I'd gone. It was subtle at first, but something about it started making me uncomfortable. At one point, he started getting more personal. He would ask about my schedule, what classes I was taking, where I lived, and who I hung out with. I'd always give polite but short answers, trying to avoid any deeper conversations. I didn't want to be rude, but there was something off about how he'd watch me when I was talking to someone else, almost like he was jealous. I noticed it, and though I never mentioned it to anyone, it gnawed at me. Then, one evening, things escalated in a way I wasn't prepared for. It was after class, and I was walking to my car, ready to head home when I saw him standing by the parking lot. He wasn't just casually leaning against a wall, he was standing in the shadows, waiting for me. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was a small campus, so the parking lot was mostly empty, and the street lights didn't reach all the corners. He called out to me, asking if I wanted to grab a coffee, but there was something in his voice that didn't sit right. It wasn't an invitation, it was an expectation. I shook my head, told him I had plans, and tried to walk past him quickly. But he didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me like he was trying to figure me out, like I was a puzzle he was determined to solve. The tension in the air thickened, and my instincts screamed at me to get away, but I tried to keep calm, telling myself it was nothing. Yet, as I walked to my car, I could feel his eyes on my back, and something about the way he stood there, motionless, made me think that maybe he wasn't just some student who had a few extra minutes to kill. The next day, I was in the library again, going through some notes between classes. And as usual, he showed up. But this time, he had something different in his hands, a small, wrapped box. When he handed it to me, my gut dropped. It wasn't the gift that was unsettling, it was the way he looked at me. He didn't smile. He didn't say anything friendly. He just stood there, waiting for me to open it. I didn't want to, but I did. Inside, there was a silver bracelet with a note that read, "For you, always." I was trying to act normal, but the feeling of dread was overwhelming. I smiled politely, thanked him, and immediately left. That night, I showed the bracelet to my roommate, and we both agreed it was creepy. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't want to make a scene, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this guy was crossing a line. His kindness was no longer innocent, it felt like a manipulation, a way to make me feel obligated, like I couldn't escape his attention. The next few days, I avoided him as best as I could. But somehow, he still managed to find me, whether in the library or around campus. His presence started to feel more and more suffocating. I started staying later on campus, hoping he wouldn't find me, and eventually, I stopped going to the library during my breaks. But it didn't end there. I began getting random texts, no messages, just a seen notification on my phone. Sometimes, he would leave random items in my locker: chocolates, notes, small trinkets, and it was clear that he was following me, waiting for me to notice him. I'm not sure if he ever truly realized how deeply his actions affected me, or if he even understood the line between being friendly and crossing into obsession. But I knew one thing for sure: the more I tried to distance myself, the more he pushed. And I was left with one question: why couldn't he take a hint? It's been years since that time, and while I've moved on and gotten into a different college, I can still remember the eerie feeling of looking over my shoulder, wondering if he was still somewhere out there, waiting. This happened 4 years ago, in the middle of winter, though it was an unusually warm night. There wasn't a hint of snow on the ground, and the chill of winter seemed to have been suspended, leaving the air unseasonably mild. I left my apartment around 8 p.m. for my daily walk. I worked nights, so my schedule was all over the place. I often found myself out at odd hours, and this walk had become part of my routine. At that time, I was in my late 20s, tall, athletic, and generally confident. I rarely thought twice about walking alone at night, especially in a city I knew well. It was a routine I had followed for years: put on my headphones, blast my music, and just walk. No big deal, right? But that night, something about it felt off. Maybe it was the quiet, or the fact that there wasn't a single person around. Maybe it was the stillness that had settled over the city, but the moment I stepped out of my apartment, a strange unease lingered in the air. I decided to head toward the bridge that crosses into the nearby city, a route I took often. The first 20 minutes were typical, just the rhythmic sound of my footsteps and the music in my ears. But as I approached the bridge, I started to feel that odd sensation again, the one where you're being watched, but you can't quite place from where. I shook it off. After all, I had lived in this area long enough to know it was safe, especially for someone like me. I was tall, fit, and could hold my own if it came to that. Still, I couldn't deny the sense that something was wrong. As I reached the bridge, I looked around. The street lights cast long shadows, stretching across the pavement, and the usual hum of traffic seemed distant, almost muffled. My music had started to blend into the background, but I could still hear the occasional sound of a car passing far off in the distance. It was too quiet. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. There was a pressure in the air now, something heavy, like the atmosphere before a storm. I paused on the bridge for a moment, trying to shake off the feeling. I took out my earbuds and listened. Nothing. No footsteps behind me, no sounds of anyone approaching. Just the silence of the night. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. After all, who would be out here at this hour, let alone follow me across a bridge? I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. But before I could move forward, I heard it. A faint rustle. Like the soft padding of footsteps on the gravel behind me. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't turn around immediately, because I didn't want to appear as though I was reacting to something that might not be there. I kept walking, but the sound of those footsteps behind me grew closer, faster, deliberate. The hairs on my arms prickled, and a chill spread across my skin despite the warm air. I glanced over my shoulder casually, but I saw nothing. Then it hit me, there was no one else on the bridge, not a soul. I was alone. Yet, I could still hear the unmistakable sound of someone following me. The footsteps were close enough now that I could almost feel their presence, like they were breathing down my neck. But every time I looked, the bridge remained empty. I started walking faster, hoping to shake whatever it was off. I crossed the halfway point, my steps growing quicker, my breath coming faster as my anxiety spiked. The sound of footsteps behind me grew more pronounced, matching my pace as if whatever it was mirroring my every move. I turned my head again, more sharply this time, my eyes scanning the darkness. Still nothing. No figure, no shadow, just the dark emptiness of the night stretching ahead. But then, in the corner of my eye, I saw something. A dark shape, almost a silhouette, flicker briefly at the edge of the bridge. I froze. I couldn't see it clearly, but the shape moved unnaturally, like it was shifting too quickly to be a person. My heart started to pound in my chest. I was no longer just hearing footsteps, I was seeing something that shouldn't have been there. Without thinking, I broke into a run, not caring any more about how ridiculous it might seem. I sprinted across the bridge, my pulse racing. The footsteps behind me quickened too. The sound became louder, more insistent. They were gaining on me, getting closer. Panic surged through my veins as I neared the end of the bridge, my feet pounding against the pavement with every step. I was almost there. Almost free. Just as I reached the end of the bridge, I dared to look behind me one more time. And that's when I saw it. A figure, tall and thin, standing on the bridge just beyond where I had been. It was a man or something that looked like a man, but there was something wrong about him. His skin was pale, almost sickly, and his eyes were wide open, unnaturally so, locked onto me with an intensity that sent a wave of dread crashing over me. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me, like it was waiting for me to look back, to make the mistake of acknowledging it. I could feel the weight of its gaze even from a distance. Without hesitating, I turned, and bolted towards the city, never once looking back. My mind raced with thoughts I couldn't control. Who was that? What did he want? How had he gotten so close without me hearing anything? I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of the well-lit streets. My breath was ragged, and my heart was still pounding, but I felt a sense of relief wash over me as I stepped into the city. I stopped by a store to catch my breath, but I didn't linger. I couldn't. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that figure trailing me in the darkness. But the street was empty, and the city, for the most part, was quiet. I never saw that man again, and after that night, I couldn't bring myself to walk that bridge again. To this day, I don't know who or what that figure was. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe it wasn't. But I've never felt comfortable walking alone at night since. So, if you're ever walking around late at night, especially near a quiet, empty bridge, just remember this: sometimes the silence isn't as empty as it seems. And you're never as alone as you think.